Following the Civil War and even well into the 20th century, Brookland was notoriously segregated, excluding potential black homeowners through racially restrictive covenants. White Washingtonians could purchase homes freely, though, in fear of social backlash and even violence, black folks could only live in ethnic enclaves in the northeast and southeast quadrants. Covenants were riders attached to house deeds regulating to whom the home could be sold. Usually they were for individual homes, but other times entire streets or even neighborhoods could enter into such agreements. As the Great Migration brought more and more black people to the city in the 1930s and 40s, the status quo began to shift. White flight to the suburbs quickened, and when some white owners realized they could get up to 50% more for their houses by selling to black families, they did. Covenants weren't the only restrictive tool, though, as banks often refused to lend to minorities. Brookland integrated in the 20th century, especially after white flight took place following World War II, and the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 1948 that restrictive covenants were unenforceable. Although Brookland had developed into a neighborhood fairly integrated among economic classes and races, Brookland rebranded from a segregated neighborhood between the Civil War and the mid-20th century to one of multicultural Christianity by the 2000s. The neighborhood is now best known for its white, black, South Asian, and Latino places of worship, hiding its racist legacy behind harmonious churches. Now a predominantly black area, Brookland shed its problematic image for one of holiness. Its revitalized reputation even led the neighborhood to be dubbed America's Holy Land. Home to dozens of chapels and oratories honoring the Mother of God and representing people from every corner of the globe, the National Shrine reflects the ethnic and cultural diversity of the United States and the universality of the Catholic Church. The Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception is the largest Roman Catholic church in North America, and it's among the largest churches in the world. The National Shrine's foundation stone was placed 100 years ago on September 23, 1920. By 2015, it attracted the likes of Pope Francis, who visited from the Vatican City for the canonization of St. Juniper, the first ceremony of its kind in the United States. My first primary source is an article from the Shrine's website, which wrote that, exiting the basilica through the west front entrance, Pope Francis smiled and waved at the still enthusiastic and adoring crowd. From the back of his little Fiat, the Holy Father bid the faithful and fond farewell as the sun set over Mary's shrine on what was truly a historic and blessed day. In its basement, the shrine holds chapels of the Virgin Mary from across the world, like Sri Lanka, China, and Vietnam. The National Shrine welcomes visitors of every color and community, a drastic shift from the racially restrictive covenants that barred minorities from the neighborhood entirely in the century prior. St. Anthony of Padua Parish is located in the Brookland area of northeast Washington, D.C., also known as Little Rome, referring to a deeply diverse Catholic community. Between 1900 and 1940, more than 50 Catholic institutions rented or owned property in Brookland, including St. Anthony of Padua Catholic Church, and the neighborhood still remains this way. Established in the early 20th century by Antoinette Margot, a founding member of the International Red Cross, for the purpose of building community amongst Brookland residents, the church is largely non-white. Working to mend the area's ethnic divisions that persisted since the Civil War and the decades of redlining, the St. Anthony of Padua Parishes uses faith to bridge gaps between warring communities. The church and its adjoined secondary school were both heavily vandalized in 2022. In my second primary source, an article from the Catholic Standard newspaper, church leaders called the vandalism a hate crime, perhaps suggesting a cultural shift in Brookland's religious image. The Franciscan Monastery of the Holy Land in America is a Franciscan complex at 14th and Quincy Streets in Brookland. Located on a hill called Mount St. Sepulchre and anchored by the Memorial Church of the Holy Sepulchre, it includes gardens, replicas of various shrines throughout Israel, a replica of the catacombs in Rome, an archive, a library, as well as the bones of Saint Armagh, brought from the Roman catacombs and originally in the Cathedral of Narni, Italy. The gardens of the monastery were laid in 1898 and construction was completed in 1899. The church's design alludes to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Its floor plan loosely resembles the five-fold Jerusalem cross. It was also built in the Neo-Byzantine style, resembling the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. The monastery and its Middle Eastern-esque architecture serves to repaint Brookland's image from a hostile, segregated space to a multicultural Christian haven. My third primary source, an article from The Wash, a local newspaper, details how the monastery partnered with other Catholic institutions to combat food insecurity amongst ethnic populations in the district, showing its commitment to racial equity. Catholic University of America, CUA, is a private Roman Catholic research university in Brookland. It's the pontifical university of the Catholic Church in the United States and the only institution of higher education founded by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Despite Washington being a segregated and southern city when the university was founded, it admitted black Catholic men as students. At the time, the only other college in the district to do so was Howard University, founded for African American education during the Civil War. In 1895, Catholic University had 3 black students, all from D.C. According to my fourth primary source, a university administrator speaking to President William McKinley during a visit on June 1st, 1900, they simply were tested as to their previous education, and this being found satisfactory, no notice was taken whatsoever of their skin color. They stand on exactly the same footing as other students of equal intellectual caliber and acquirements. Archie Edwards opened his Brookland barbershop in 1959 during a time when segregation and racial tumult were more commonplace. He apprenticed and was educated in his craft in Virginia before establishing the shop on Bunker Hill Road in Brookland, Washington. Edwards' barbershop quickly became a Christian hub for local black gospel artists and musicians, including his childhood idol Mississippi John Hurt. His shop served to transform Brookland into a safe haven for Christian black folks, who faced social and systemic persecution in all other corners of the neighborhood. Archie Edwards created a home for the blues and gospel in Brookland, inviting several gospel musicians to his shop. Edwards performed solo and with many other local blues and gospel musicians, including Flora Moulton, Phil Wiggins, John Cephas, and Mother Esther May Scott. My fifth primary source is a quote from Mother Scott saying, "He's the best blues player I ever saw in my life." When Edwards died in the same year, 1999, his friends tried to hold on to the shop by giving concerts and selling CDs, but it wasn't enough, and in 2008 the shop was sold. But even if the barbershop is gone, Archie Edwards' gospel music legacy lives on. His friends and blues and gospel fans started the Archie Edwards Blues Heritage Foundation in loving memory of him. For my last historic site, I'd be remiss not to acknowledge the roots of black and brown Christianity in Brookland. Enslaved people in the district were largely polytheistic, perpetuating the beliefs of their ancestors. However, they were forcibly converted by their Christian slave owners. During the Civil War, the Queen family held more enslaved black people in bondage than anyone else in Brookland, with 24 of them. Under the control of Mary and Elizabeth Queen, the enslaved workers were shared with the eldest Queen sister, Anne, the wife of Jehiel Brooks. Jehiel Brooks and his wife, Anne Queen, built their home between 1837 and 1840 and named it the Brooks Mansion. It cost $25,000 to build. The two plantation-owning white families brought their enslaved laborers for household upkeep and forced their mass conversions to Christianity on the property. Since its construction, for better or for worse, the house has been a significant Christian landmark in the Brookland neighborhood. Although the slaveholders Jehiel Brooks and Anne Queen are revered in history books, their forcibly converted enslaved workers remain unknown to this day. Ultimately, black and brown residents of Brookland took ownership of their faith, building the religious institutions previously mentioned, but in the colonial age, Christianity was not their savior, but their oppressor. In conclusion, the presence of Christianity in Brookland is neither adverse or favorable. Christian ideals encourage racism against black and brown residents who then sought refuge in inclusive Christian spaces. In the face of social and systemic discrimination, minorities found safe haven in religious institutions like the Basilica, St. Anthony Parish, and the Franciscan Monastery. Black residents even created artistic manifestations of their Christian faith through gospel music at Archie Edwards' barbershop. However, the Brooks Mansion serves to remind us that the conversion of minorities to the faith was not consensual.